This is also when they announced that they were going to do a fan club that would affectionately be known as the Fiend Club. You know, it's funny, we talk about how, like, you know, the Misfits retroactively are, like, so ahead of their time, and, like, you know, they're doing all these things outside of their time, in the sense that, like, if they were ahead of the curve, they were doing things that everybody would do 20 years later, you know what I'm saying?
I have always been a consumer and a collector, and I personally like buying things. There's not many things I like doing in this world. I mean, everything's not music.
So what they used to do is they would just make shit. They made a lot of shit, a lot of really cool shit. I guess maybe in Glenn's basement and at Jerry's house and stuff. And one of the things that they got heavily into was screen printing. We know this because of all the posters that they would silk screen posters and print posters in these very primitive analog sort of ways. Today you can Photoshop something and you send it to the printer and they print it up. You know, you send it to one of those guys and they print up the shirts and they send it back to you in a box. But back then, DIY in the late 70s, you know, you wanted to make your own shit, you had to make your own shit. What they were essentially doing was they were doing their own Hot Topic in the basement. What does that mean? It means that, like, every fucking, like, counterculture shirt you can get at Hot Topic, all, like, the cool things that, like, you know, you see, it's like, oh, I love that cereal, I love Count Chocula. Well, you know what? I want a t-shirt of Count Chocula. And back in the day, unless you ordered it directly maybe from the cereal company itself, you're not going to get a Count Chocula t-shirt. So what do? You make it.
Count Chocula. Biffle, here's the super sweet new cereal, Frankenberry.
But I've got chocolate sweeties for monstrous chocolate flavor.
As far as selling t-shirts, I think that t-shirts are great. I always wanted t-shirts of my favorite bands, and lots of times they never just were available when I was growing up. I think it's a great thing to have the t-shirts.
And that was like a very DIY punk sort of thing to do. And that's what, you know, those guys were doing. And so they're printing their own t-shirts. And not only are they printing them, they start printing band t-shirts. But they're printing just things that they really like. Lots of different characters. And then what they're doing is they're bringing them to the city and selling them in t-shirt shops. You have all the punk stuff going on musically, but then there's also, like, the fashion side of things.
Mom, Dad, I wasn't expecting you until Monday.
What are you doing?
You shouldn't play dress up with the children like this, Terry. It's not a good role model.
And you go on St. Mark's.
I run away from people here. I like the people. This is my favorite neighborhood anywhere in the world.
You know, Tish and Snooki of the Sick Fucks, they had a store called Manic Panic. And you may be familiar with their hair color line, which comes from that store, Manic Panic. And those dudes are millionaires. At least Tish and Snooki are, and that's where all the hair color. I believe that's where how Doyle dyed his hair pink back in the day, when he got in a lot of trouble for dyeing his hair pink in 8th grade, and it was in the paper and shit.
This is my new image.
What?
So they would take these shirts. Glenn and Jerry, in 1979 specifically, I know this, would take these t-shirts to stores like Natasha's, and everybody's seen that picture. I believe it's Natasha, Jerry Only, the person I interviewed, and Joey Ramone, because Natasha used to make clothes for the Misfits as well as Joey Ramone. And he's in a leopard print suit. This guy who I interviewed, he's in that picture. Everybody's seen that picture. It's an iconic picture.
We ended up making really good friends with the Misfits. In fact, the Misfits Fiend Club, those of you familiar with the history of the band, started at Natasha's loft. And that was up on 27th Street. And so her store, Natasha's store, was kind of the home of the Misfits fan club, which was a legendary punk fashion store in the East Village on St. Mark's Place. A lot of famous people used to come in.
To run into Dave Street, that famous downtown comedian.
I ran into you. You didn't run into me. I ran into you.
So Dave, do you run into a lot of people down here?
I run away from a lot of people down here.
So they would bring these shirts to various different shops. I know for a fact Natasha's. I don't know where else. And what they would do is they would sell stuff on consignment, and that's how they would, you know, partially fund the band, at least. You know, that's how Glenn would generate revenue. And there are tons of these shirts.
And a lot of people treasure those shirts. Sometimes we'll stay at someone's house and they'll open up their closet and go, "Look at these. I saved these," and blah, blah. And they'll have a fucking whole line of Misfit shirts, or, you know, and there'll be other shirts by other bands in there.
As I recall, the process goes like this. You know, you're not going to scan it into your scanner because scanners didn't exist back then. So what would you do? Remember the overhead projectors in school, like back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I guess? So what you do is you take your image, whatever it is, you rip something out of a magazine, right? You tear out an ad or a comic book page or whatever. You put it on the overhead. You put it on the bed. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. And then the light shoots up through the thing, and then it projects onto a wall. And then what you do is you have this image, right? You have this image against the wall that's been projected, and you take your pen or pencil or whatever, and you start to trace it. And you trace it like this, as so. You trace whatever the image is onto your paper, however big you want it. And how do you decide how much to blow it up on? Well, with a computer, you just go, oh, I want it at 100% or 90% or 80%. But back then, all you got to do is just, you know, much like if you're projecting light against a wall, all you do is just move it closer, move it farther away. If you want the image to be smaller, move it closer. If you want the image to be bigger, you move it far away, and that blows up the image or shrinks the image. The more you blow up an image, the weirder and more blurry it's going to look like. The closer you get, depending on the resolution and the detail. And so what Glenn, I don't know if Jerry did, I guess Jerry did it too maybe, and I know that Erie Von would do a ton of this. What they would do is they would blow shit up and they would trace it, and there's a process, you put some chemical, I forget what it is, you put a chemical on the screen that you're tracing onto or something. I'm missing a step here. You could probably Google this on YouTube. You put something on the screen, you put a chemical, and then you scrape it away, and it leaves like an image. It leaves like a negative image of whatever it is that you were silk screening, and that becomes the screen. And then what you do is you take your paint, whatever paint you have, and the guys, film in acetone. Thank you, Eric. I believe, yeah, acetone I think is what you use you pour on the acetone. They go down to Chinatown, and they pick up these shitty white t-shirts, you know, like really, really poor quality, because obviously they want really low overhead. I'll read the label to you. It says 100% cotton. Oh, this one was from Sears. Okay, so that was a Sears shirt. I know that they used to use bootleg Chinatown shirts. This label is a medium. I don't know where it's from. The acetone sort of melts the film into the mesh of the screen. Thank you, Eric. There's our scientific explanation that I was not able to provide. Shout out to Eric Carroll in the comments. So they would do that. They'd get their silk screens. They'd go down to Chinatown. They would pick up tons and tons of these cheap, shitty t-shirts, and they would make their own t-shirts. This one is not hand-colored. I've seen ones where I've seen Vampirella ones that are just black and white with no color. This is the only one I've seen that has color like this. And so he tried to do like this red. And every time you change a color when you're silk screening this way, you have to use a different screen. You can't use the same screen, although maybe what they did, this looks like it was a fade, so maybe they used the same screen. He put red, and then he put yellow, and then he tried to fade it to create a little bit of orange. Colors have faded over the years. But as you can see, you know, quite clearly, this was something probably out of a comic book that Glenn had, and he projected it and traced it. Notice, look at all the line work, man. I mean, this was all done by hand. That's what's so insane about this. Besides being actually printed by hand, you know, this was traced by hand, and the lines are really thick. Who knows if the drawing had such thick lines? I might have had to compensate a bit, right? So this is a Glenn Danzig original shirt, man. Like, Glenn printed this himself. I don't know if this is true or not. I tell people this is true. I don't know who else might have colored it. Maybe it wasn't. But I like to think this is a hand-colored Glenn Danzig Night of the Living Dead t-shirt right here. So here's Night of the Living Dead, and this looks like it was orange marker. So he printed it, and once again, look at the image. Look how, you know, there's a lot of detail in that image that is sort of like, everything's really thick, because you couldn't have such thin lines when you're doing such, fine. You can't have such fine line work when you're printing in this sort of way, or it's harder to. And so it's like you're trying to keep as much detail as you can, but you're keeping all the lines really thick. Lastly, this one I'm told is actually exceedingly rare. This is a Beware shirt. This is a Beware shirt. So these are 1979 era shirts, Night of the Living Dead and Beware. I don't think they would be printing a Beware or the Night of the Living Dead in '82. Maybe they did. Maybe it was on the Fiend Club form, but you would have to imagine that they were probably extra stock that Glenn had, or maybe he kept running them off. He already had the silk screen made. You know, those silk screens are good for a certain period of time, then they eventually they get shot, and you got to make a new one. So maybe he was running them off. Who knows?
How did you start the Fiend Club?
We just basically put little inserts inside all the 45s.
Now, what made
you
an
application?
What made you come across doing something, the Misfits Fiend Club?
Well, we wanted to get more feedback from our fans and wanted to get a little closer to them and see what they liked and didn't like and stuff like that, and offer them stuff like T-shirts and stuff.
It didn't cost anything, did it?
No, it didn't cost anything, and we always sent out free stuff.
Tell them about the Fiend Club. You just send in your name and you're in the Fiend Club and you get like free buttons and stickers whenever we get them made up, you know, you send them out to you. A bunch of other shit, and get T-shirts and shit like the rubber dick.
And what did you get though?
You got an 8x10 picture, whatever one we had at that time printed up. Tons of free stickers, T-shirt order forms if you wanted them, and our prices were real reasonable at first. Even later on, even now they're still reasonable compared to.
You get the button too at that time.
You got buttons whenever they came out. Our T-shirts at first were $5 and $6, and they were full color. Hand-painted, full color.
Right, I remember the horror business.
You know, the black was screened on, and the colors were all colored. And eventually, we just started doing them black and white because we were getting too many orders. And they were still $5 and $6.
Right.
And just recently, they went up to $7, and now the black shirts are $8. And
is that postage paid or ad postage?
And that's postage paid, too, okay? So that's a pretty good deal. You know, with the Misfits, it was always like kind of a fun thing for us, you know? We like doing that kind of stuff.
Horrors through the mail, we'll send a horror to your house. You know, whatever you want. Alright, so what are your big influences now? Send us your skulls, everything you got. Your mother, your father, your brother, everybody.
The Fiend Club was actually located at Danzig's apartment. That's right. Glenn used to live in the city for a time. As a matter of fact, I think Glenn lived with some of the guys and the victims.
So you stayed there, man. You never moved away. You've been living there all your life, right?
Well, I moved, to New York and stayed there for a few years.
Well, that's quite a change, quite a distance.
Not that much.
And his apartment was 145th West 27th Street, 2E.
And I just wanted to do it on my own then. I wanted to do it through the mail. We had a very big Fiend Club.
So how many people did you end up having on your mailing list while that was going?
At the end of the Misfits, we had 5,000 Fiend members. It's also a thing I wanted to do to prove I didn't need distributors. Okay?
Right.
I sold those records through the Fiend Club, and I made twice as much as I would have made if I sold them to distributors.
Well, Evil Live Records, just for the fan club that we have, it's just for Fiend Club members, that's out now.
What is it?
It's Evil Live. It's 7 live songs.
And you have to be part of the Misfits Fiend Club.
Yeah, and there's only 1,100. And we haven't even sent out the mailer on it yet, and like 200 are sold.
You know, what happened was back then, when that whole scene, the punk rock scene was going on, the biggest thing going on, you would put out a 45, get it in all the records. Back then, there were a lot of record shops, mom and pop shops, bigger shops. So you'd go around Manhattan, wherever, everywhere, and, some people would buy the record, some people would let you put it in there for sale. And then they'd pay you later if they're going to pay you after it's sold.
We get a lot of calls, like people trying to get a hold of Misfits records, stuff like, let's see, what was it, Where Eagles Dare with Ratfink on it, and We Are 138. Is there any possible way of getting a hold of those records?
No, unless you go to a collector's record store and get them. Maybe if you pick up a copy of Beware, that's got like the first.
That's even harder to get than the singles now.
Yeah?
All around in Boston it is, yeah. The only thing that's available by the Misfits to anybody is probably Walk Among Us or the Halloween single. That's it. 0.
Well, Three Hits from Hell is available.
London Dungeons.
Yeah, that's Three Hits from Hell, 45.
The old stuff would be nice to repress, but when you ain't got the money, you just go with something new.
So you're going to have the new stuff?
Yeah.
So the old stuff just, it's gone.
The old stuff is like been pressed, you know what I mean? So it's not like there's not copies out there. It's just that they're all bought up, and that, after a certain amount, you really don't want to press anymore. You know what I mean? It's like get onto the new stuff.
Right.
This one on eBay would go for like $2,000 because they're so scarce. It's only 500 copies where this was made.
The actual records were so hard to come by, and people wanted to have something Misfits that suddenly you started to just like seeing like all these like bootlegs just popping up in stores all over the world. So there was a lot of dirty stuff going on. Then there was some strange things, like there was a Cough Cool bootleg that was coming out on clear vinyl that actually sounded better than the original. All the originals had a lot of noise, like in the beginning of them, and the bootlegs didn't have that noise. And that always struck me as like, okay, well, somebody has access to the original tapes of these things that's putting these out. Otherwise, they wouldn't sound so well.
The way you could tell this from a reissue is you have to look at the lock groove, and I had inscribed on the lacquer R. Flores, that's my name, and all the copies have that.
The do-it-yourselfer could conquer the business world, you know, and it's like, you know, like the creation of with Bill Gates and the screen for the video for the computer, you know, all of a sudden everything is different. It's a whole new ballgame. Hi,
I'm Rich Flores. Been doing record mastering since 1972.
The Cough Cools were pressed on very thick vinyl. They were pressed over at Roma Bar in Brooklyn. That was an old-fashioned place. They did reggae small presses of, you know, like 200, 300.
When I was living in Brooklyn and had the mastering facility located in Brooklyn, known as Spectrum Sound, and Glenn Danzig of the Misfits, I cut their first 45 master, which happens to be this one, which was on Blank Records. This is their very first 45 RPM. He only made like 500 copies of this.
You know, vinyl was, that's how we started. We would make 500 pieces and sell them and then make 1,000. Then sell that and make 2,000 every time. Change the color, change the sleeve.
Who's paying for it all?
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're big gamblers.
Okay, so who's gonna put the record out? Plan 9?
Plan 9. It might be, you know, marketed by a different label, like say Enigma or something. But if I have the money by the end of the month, just do it on Plan 9. It'll just come out of Plan 9.
Well, who marketed the last one, the Earth AD?
I did. We'd put it out and try and sell as many copies as we could, and then talk to majors, you know.
Get picked up.
Because they charge you for everything. I mean, if you want to do a video or...
You know, I've learned over the years that everything I need to do, I need to own. So, you know, I've done records for other people, and they don't do what I want with them.
The Wonders are in breach of contract.
Sorry. I'm really sorry, Mr. White.
Well, don't worry. No one's going to prison, son. It's a very common tale.
It's out of necessity. It's like, to me, DIY is more out of necessity. I mean, if somebody came to me, from a major record company and said, we want to sign you, we want to do, we want to give you full freedom to do what you want to do, I wouldn't turn it down. But at the same time, if they came to me and said, we want to sign you, but we want you to do dance music, I wouldn't do it. I would just rather.
The most important thing is when you're working on something, you figure out what your resources are and how you can manipulate them into putting you where you want to be. And that's something that we've mastered.
It's about packaging. It's about images. It's about product. It's about giving you something that's worth the money without the music, because the music is free.
When Glenn came to me, he found me in the phone book, right? So he wanted to do a pressing of 500 copies or 1,000. So I said, Glenn, okay, listen, the first thing we're going to start with, you bring me your tape from the studio. We're going to cut the 45 onto a 12-inch disc like this. We're going to do two sides, one B side, one A side. We need two separate discs, not one. Then that gets sent over to the electroplating plant where they make your metal stampers. They'll tell you the price. If you want to have only 500 copies, you do what they call a strike-off. If you want to have more than 1,000 copies, you would need at least a stamper mother made from that same metal part. And then after that, if the stamper breaks down during the pressing plant, you can always have another metal parts made, and you don't have to come back to me to recut the whole thing from scratch. So we did the equalization. We cut his, we did a test cut on the outside diameter. We played it back. He was satisfied with it, and we did the actual 45 diameter gets cut on a 12-inch disc. Send it out to the plating plant. I gave him the name and the address of Roma Pressing Plant in Brooklyn, which no longer exists today, and he had only 500 copies made because of budget reasons. I guess he wasn't intending Cough Cool to become, more of multi-million-dollar record. It just was just a strike offer, records to hand out to his friends. And
all the negative talk could just get squelched in one shot when someone would say, well, who else does what the Misfits does for their fans, okay? Who else gives them all this free shit? The DKs, man, you have to pay for everything with that band. And a lot of the other bands, too. Black Flag, they charge you for everything. Every button, every sticker, everything. We're the only band giving away all that free shit.